The most surprising thing is how many businesses are zombie companies. Businesses that are not producing any profit, that are not producing positive cash flow, but are surviving because of credit, because of debt.
So easy credit leads to short-term thinking, leads to ultimate failure.
Their passion and their drive gets drowned out by the debt. And it's just a function of the system we're in. Bitcoin has shown me is if you want something that's going to actually be valuable in the long term, you have to be able to push out your time horizon. Once you understand Bitcoin, you can't look at inflation the same. You can't look at the world economy the same. Now that I've discovered Bitcoin and I understand it, like I feel so much more empowered or like optimistic for the future. Why do I feel like there's something under the surface that I can't put my finger on? Bitcoin allowed me to put my finger on it. Bitcoin evokes more of a community-minded approach and allows you to actually be incentivized to be a good person rather than just looking out for yourself and kind of moving with the flow of how the rest of the fiat world does. So I think it speaks to that, the power. If money, the financial institutions, if we're saying that it's objective, then Bitcoin is the most objective source of value we have due to its properties.
Medium of Exchange is sponsored by the Bitcoin Payments Advisor. If you own or run a business and you'd like to accept Bitcoin but don't know how, the Bitcoin Payments Advisor can help. From specific software recommendations and accounting implications to training employees and marketing so your customers know you accept this new form of payment, the Bitcoin Payments Advisor can help simplify your journey in accepting Bitcoin for your business. Check out bitcoinpaymentsadvisor.com and get 10% off when you pay in Bitcoin. Again, that's bitcoinpaymentsadvisor.com. Now let's get back to the show.
So welcome to the Medium of Exchange podcast, Jordan. We're really excited to have you on today. This podcast, as you know, we talk about Bitcoin and Bitcoin adoption, specifically tended towards small and medium-sized businesses. So as we think about Bitcoin and as it kind of transforms the world as we know it, we're seeing a gradual change to it becoming that medium of exchange. And how Jason and I view the purpose of this conversation is to be that tip of the spear, to show how businesses and how people like yourself are adopting Bitcoin, researching Bitcoin, and also helping others discover Bitcoin. So with that, Jordan, welcome to the show. Would love to kind of just start off by passing the baton over to you. Give us a little bit of an intro, talk about yourself, what you're working on, and also how you got introduced into Bitcoin and really incorporating it into both your business and your life.
Perfect. Thank you, Jack. And thank you, Jason, for having me. I'm super excited to be on this podcast and always love meeting other Bitcoiners. And this is my first podcast actually talking about Bitcoin. So it's going to be exciting to, kind of navigate that together. But yeah, kind of a little bit of backstory about me. So I started a bookkeeping firm about 4 years ago. And when I started my company, I was pretty obsessed with finance in general, but more traditional finance in terms of financial analysis, fundamental analysis, not so much technical analysis with businesses. And when I started my business, Bitcoin, and this was back in 2021, Bitcoin was obviously, I knew about Bitcoin at the time, but I wasn't interested in it. I was interested in stocks, bonds, all of those things, traditional finance. And I was very influenced by Warren Buffett early in my kind of years of getting into finance. And what actually drove me to Bitcoin, getting over that cynical kind of, I would say, path was I actually had a client, this was during 2022, that was getting into the NFT space. And I was helping navigate that on the accounting side. And I kind of was like, okay, this kind of all kind of seems a little scammy, like this whole space. And that's what drove me to learn more about Bitcoin, because it just took me down that rabbit hole of understanding what was like the foundational piece of that industry and why that is the only piece that really matters. And all the other stuff is just kind of, dust in the wind. So that was kind of my impetus of becoming interested in Bitcoin. And then, as you all well know, that once you learn about it, you then just start to go down like little like niche rabbit holes about, the Federal Reserve, the Jekyll Island, all these other things that have happened that have led to where we are today economically. And now that I am more, I guess, well versed in the space, I really found a passion in like educating business owners. And that's kind of what has led me to building not only my business, like still the bookkeeping, accounting in the traditional space, but trying to branch off and build something that's going to add value to the business space for years to come. And that was kind of I'm starting a little project on the side, Bitcoin for businesses that I'm trying to build up. And this is kind of the first stage of me talking to other individuals like yourself. So that's kind of the quick roundabout of where we are today.
Jordan, that's amazing. Can you so tell us more about Bitcoin for businesses?
Yeah. So kind of the vision that I have, and this is very early stage, is one of the biggest value propositions that I have found within my business, my traditional kind of bookkeeping business, is the need for small businesses to be more proactive in their financial management rather than reactive. So many businesses, we all know the statistics about businesses and failure rates. And obviously, one of the biggest that drive that is the cash flow issues that businesses face. And one of the things that I've tried to, it's so hard to be in the traditional space when you have the Bitcoin knowledge. And that was kind of this thing that I was trying to bridge of like, how can I find a way to get average Joes, business owners that have no understanding about Bitcoin, to start to walk the path, the orange, path to Bitcoin. And what drove me was, okay, I want to provide educate. It's really like grounded in educational services that I would hopefully be able to build to more of a consulting of how to have a Bitcoin treasury, at least start a little bit. And that's kind of like I'm just taking little pieces at a time, trying to find what are the pain points and trying to solve them individually rather than just saying, hey, we're going to adopt the Bitcoin, standard, right? It's like, how can we just get a little bit of adoption slowly? And that's kind of been, I'm kind of in the research and development phase of the business, just trying to understand where are those business owners at and how can we nudge them towards a little bit of understanding the fundamental problem that Bitcoin's trying to solve and how we can do it in the most efficient way possible. So very early stages, but I really would love to be able to develop that over time as Bitcoin grows.
So when you're talking about your background in traditional bookkeeping and finance,
Yeah.
and as you are really in the weeds there, and I emphasize weeds because of how confusing and complex our financial system is and has become. What are some of those pain points when you're reaching out to business owners that you're like, hey, this could actually be a solution for you? Bitcoin is a decentralized peer-to-peer system that maybe you can use as a treasury to start and then grow that to the point where, oh, that a customer will want to start taking Bitcoin and transacting with it. What are some of those points that you've found either really interest you or even better, even interest your clients?
Yeah. So the biggest hurdle I always find is it's the mindset component of what they're used to. In a credit-based system, it's so easy to get loans or to put everything on a credit card. And we all know what that does for cash flow is like you're borrowing from your future self. And when business is not, when the business cycles are happening and, things are not working in the business, it's a vicious cycle if the business is not operating efficiently. So I would say the biggest pain point is just helping people get over the hurdle of how can this really help my business, especially when all they know about Bitcoin is the media, what the media is pushing in terms of it being used, in the early days for, illegal transactions, or that it's just there's no value to it. And when I ex when when you ex it's very hard to explain to a business owner sometimes without getting into the weeds. And then when you get into the weeds, you sometimes lose them. And I think the biggest hurdle is just how do you approach it in a way universally that everyone sees the value without them becoming cynical or dismissive. And I don't know if that's just a function of, yes, it's an early asset, and maybe that's just how it's going to be. Or maybe there just needs to be a better way to educate them and actually show them the value very quickly so it clicks. And that I think has been the hardest thing is finding a way to explain Bitcoin quickly and simply enough to where they're like, okay, where do I sign? Like, where do I start to take payments or how do I start to onboard it? Does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that is the total like, you know, we're in that process of going 0 to 1 and
Yeah.
understanding like most people don't know about Bitcoin. They don't
Yeah.
know what's going on in the day to day. They don't
No.
care to know because they're focused on their work, their job, their family, putting food on the table for themselves. And what I think Bitcoiners are really working towards now, and we're evolving towards what I call this bridge cycle of, like you mentioned, really meeting these people where they're at, is getting some of those quick, valuable insights and propositions to people where it's like, okay, I can implement this into my business and it will help me in the long, in maybe the short term, there might be some volatility, but in the long term, I'm willing to take that risk. And that's what I find so interesting about where we are at in terms of adoption. River put out a report the other week that we're at 4% adoption. So super early. We are still
Very.
early. And understanding that most people are going to be resistant to any change whatsoever, that when you start talking about money, it just becomes a very personal and real issue. And I mean, I love what you said about Warren Buffett too, of taking it from a actually risk averse approach versus just this is a super risky asset that is going to be very volatile. But when you actually think about and study the qualities of Bitcoin and change your perspective on security and how the protocol works, and deflationary, uh, secured by the miners and the nodes and the network, all working together towards a common goal of the next block in consensus, it creates that diversified, almost risk averse asset that can also be a passive savings tool for that business. So I totally agree with what you're saying there, and I think then once you start to implement that, people will want to uh, use Bitcoin as a way to pay and receive, and say, why would I need dollars here? Because it's just adding a layer of additional, confusion and costs and complexity. So I totally hear you there, and I think like you said, like we said, we are still early.
Jordan, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So, Jordan, you mentioned the average Joe business. I like to call them everyday business owners. When you're working day to day with the average Joe business owner, you guys are talking about Bitcoin. What would you say to them? Like, how does Bitcoin help their business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it can be somewhat of a hard one to answer because it's like getting to that part of like mentioning Bitcoin because I think it definitely depends on how long I've been working with them and my relationship with them and how
Hmm.
much, that's the amazing thing about running a small kind of boutique firm is I have a personal relationship with all my clients. And I'll give you an example of a client that I had that is kind of startup, not like a brick and mortar type business, more service based, working with software. And the impetus to bring up Bitcoin for them was they had a business structure that was had a time period, somewhat like insurance, where they collect payments up front and they have an obligation in the future to disperse those payments. And we started off kind of on the financial side of just putting that in a high yield savings account, trying to get some yield on it. And kind of what I mentioned to them was, hey, like, would you be interested in potentially putting it into Bitcoin in a strategic way? Obviously, understanding what funds you can use that are not going to put, clients' funds at risk, but having that to catch some yield on top of the fee that you're already taking from your services. And they were very much they were interested, they were, intrigued, but it's been a conversation that I've been having for 6 months now, and things have kind of changed in their business, due to market changes and just things happening. So it's kind of like we put it to the side now just because of the uncertainty. But that's an example of when there's an opportunity to potentially build more wealth for the owner, I think that is one of the greatest ways to start off, and finding a specific point on how you could use it rather than just saying, hey, do you want to invest in Bitcoin? I think positioning it in a way that is going to set the client up long term. And that's one thing I also mentioned at the outset with this client in particular, was like, this is not a short-term play. That's why we have to be very strategic with it. And they're very much also, this client is very much interested in, like, independence and just kind of that mindset. They already had that. So it was an easy conversation to have. Now, if I were to do it with some of my more, maybe brick and mortar type established businesses, the conversation would probably need to be more well thought out rather than just like me bringing it up randomly, off the cuff. But I think if you target a specific need and you have a use case example in the business, it's a lot easier to bring it up. And then if they're interested, that's when you could go into the Bitcoin conversation of what is Bitcoin, what is it
Mm-hmm.
solving, why wouldn't I just put it into a stock portfolio, those kind of questions,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of navigating those.
I love that what I wrote down here on my notes, meeting them where they're at. Because when you're in a relational situation and you have that one-on-one relationship, you can meet each business owner where they're at. And I think that's one of the really critical things is like all of us are on a different stage with our Bitcoin journey, right?
Yeah.
And so many folks at this time don't don't really know that much about Bitcoin. And so how can you meet them where they're at? What would you say for obviously here on the Medium of Exchange podcast, we believe in the adoption of Bitcoin, not just as a store of value, but as a medium of exchange. You're talking, let's say, to the average Joe business, and they're like, yeah, so Bitcoin, um, you know, should I accept that in my business? What would you say to them?
I would say yes. I mean, I would say yes, because to me, that's just whether they're going to use it. Let's say they do accept it. I think then going from, okay, well, what are you going to do with that Bitcoin once you get it? Do you want to, do you want to create some sort of storage policy, having those things? And obviously it gets tricky because then once you collect it and then if you convert it, like, I think the complexity is what stops a lot of people
Hmm.
beyond the understanding. Once you get the understanding, you then have to understand the complexity of, okay, if I do accept it, it's not considered, like the dollar, right? Where you can just accept it and then you can use those funds without having to care about any tax consequences, et cetera. So I think the complexity side is where it gets tricky. But if someone wanted to accept Bitcoin, I'd be like, that's a great idea, especially if you want to, use it as a store of value. And then especially businesses that, let's say, have cross-border payments or all these other things, like that's where I could see extreme value with those type of clients that are, you know, having kind of a globalization business rather than more local. But 100% accepting Bitcoin, I would say yes. So let's figure out the best way to do that.
You mentioned global, and so your firm is called Ikifi. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah,
And
Ikifi.
Ikifi, and there is this is based off of a Japanese philosophy, Ikigai.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that is profound, especially in this conversation around Bitcoin. So, just for our listeners, can you give a little bit of a background into how you came up with the name, what Ikifi means to you? Sorry, what Ikigai means to you, and how you kind of incorporate that into the underlying values of your business. And then from there, we can see, how Bitcoin just totally makes sense and fits in with that overall culture.
Yeah. Thank you for that recognition. I mean, for me, when I started my business, from very day one, I knew something needed, like something felt off in the financial world to me. I couldn't pinpoint it. I felt like it was very transactional in nature, very much of a, push someone down to get to the next level. And we all know the power money has in our lives. It's in every aspect, whether you love money or you say you don't love money. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. And for me, I knew I wanted to infuse some sort of values into my business from the very beginning. I just didn't really know the path. And about a year and a half into my business, I discovered the philosophy of Ikigai. And for me, fulfillment is so important because I think happiness is a fleeting feeling. Happiness is not, it's something that we feel in the moment, whether it's eating something sweet or seeing someone we love, like we have that happiness feeling, but it kind of goes away. It's not our homeostasis. And I think fulfillment is that level that is actually more valuable because it's long lasting. And for me, that just felt so aligned within the financial space because in so many ways people are trying to do, get rich quick schemes and just trying to make as much money as possible, but not really understanding their why behind it. Why do they want money? And we all want it for some reason. So that's kind of what developed the Ikifi concept. Was I wanted to intertwine that philosophy into my business. And Japanese philosophy is very much driven on this equilibrium between humans, nature, and just this kind of holistic approach, which I really appreciate. And that's kind of the approach I wanted to take in my business. And kind of going back to what Jason was talking about with the relationship and how it's so crucial when you're small is having that relationship with your clients. And when I can understand what a client's why is and what their purpose is and why they started their business, because yeah, you could start your business to make millions of dollars, but why do you want to make millions of dollars? Like there's something behind that. And that was kind of the approach I wanted to take, was understanding what the business is trying to accomplish, what's the lifestyle the entrepreneur wants, and kind of intertwining that in the financial analysis I do in the client's books, et cetera. And then kind of bringing it full circle with your question with Bitcoin is there's something deeply philosophical about Bitcoin. And I think that's why I became so interested in it, because it's not just something that was invented because they wanted to, you know, revolutionize the financial system. Like maybe on some level that was a long-term vision, but it was very much just driven off the small piece of that peer-to-peer electronic, cash, right? That the thing that they were trying to do for so long. And then it builds into something more. It's not, we're going to change everything from day one. It's we're going to build towards that. And I think the purpose in that why is exactly why I became interested in Bitcoin, because I understand the why is more important than the surface level approach that's, we're so often driven to take in life.
That's great. Yeah, no, that is exactly kind of how I was thinking of it. And I love that framing of, you know, yeah, you can say something on the surface
Yeah.
of I want to do this for that reason, and A equals B, but there might be something that's underlying that true motivation. And if you can find that common ground, then that's where you really, make connections, and you can become a sort of trusted advisor. And you understand that you're working towards the same goal or strategy or whatever it may be. So I just definitely wanted to give a shout out there, because
Yeah.
Japanese philosophy is something that I'm also very passionate and interested about. So once I put those two together, I was like, okay, I was like, this is gonna work.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Jordan, on your LinkedIn, it says that you are empowering clients by giving money meaning. What does giving money meaning mean to you?
Yeah. So meaning is subjective. Meaning is something that we all put on everything that we have in our lives. And I think that's where it gets very nuanced, is in the traditional space, money is just is seen almost as the goal, right? Of like, I want to make $1 million, or I want to see this number in my bank account. And the meaning behind it comes down to kind of a personal, I would say, journey, personal growth phase of understanding what it is money provides us, and being able to bring that to light for clients, and being able to bring in what they've told me and show them how they're progressing towards their goals, show them in tangible ways. Because I think a lot of times, meaning and these words kind of get lost in abstract thoughts of, oh, meaning and fulfillment and everything. And to me, money and finances is a very, it's objective in terms of like the value and all the things there, but it's very subjective in how you perceive it and how you look at the current circumstances you're in. So for me, giving money meaning is really about understanding where people are at and trying to tell them a story that's aligned with where they're going or where they want to go. Because as soon as someone feels a level of confidence or empowerment that let's say they're paying down debt to reach a goal of, being debt free because they want to be able to, travel or whatever it is, or have a family, knowing those things allow me to kind of bring in a more personal touch. And I really think that is also why Bitcoin is so important, because if the financial institutions, if we're saying that it's objective, then Bitcoin is the most objective source of value we have due to its properties. And if we can infuse that into what we have now, the meaning becomes even more powerful.
That's so good. That's so good. Yeah.
And it feels right, because as soon as you learn about Bitcoin, as soon as you learn about the history of money, or asking the question, what is money, you then start to on some level you might feel a little discouraged, because you're like, I've been lied to my whole life. You learn about in economics 101 that inflation is just fundamental to, economics and Keynesian economics and all these things. And then you start to figure out, oh, wait, there's this other school of economics, Austrian economics, out there. Never even heard of it, and you just start to learn that there are other frames of thought that we are just not aware of. And I don't think it's a malicious act for the most of the world. I think it's just unconscious that we live in this. But as soon as you start to see the trends and you say, well, that makes way more logical sense than what we're basing everything off of now, you kind of can follow that trail to. And I'm telling you, now that I've discovered Bitcoin and I understand it, like, I feel so much more empowered or like optimistic for the future. And
Mm.
that's something that I feel like, if I didn't have that, I feel like I would have been questioning, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel like there's something under the surface that I can't put my finger on? And Bitcoin allowed me to put my finger on it.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what's so interesting about meeting Bitcoiners and going to different Bitcoin type events and having conversations with, the continued growth of more Bitcoiners that get introduced to the protocol every day, is because, to your point, everybody has a different why. Everybody's, going through life trying to find or figure out different things. But what's great about Bitcoin, from my experience, is when you start to talk to somebody, they might have approached the rabbit hole from an entirely different uh, realm of the universe. But then you start to adopt like these similar ideas and philosophies. And then you also can almost reframe it all and apply it to things that you already know, because, to your point, a lot of it is unconscious. So when you're learning about, just microeconomics 101 and all of these regular curriculums that are taught in schools, you're like, oh, there was another door. There could have been a fork in the road. But I digress. And I think that's, finding that's something that is empowering, because it shows you that there might not be uh, other other areas or things that we're familiar with about money, but then also what else is there, what else is out there. And it just continues that journey, and you get deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, to the point where, like, myself, I see things through a lens of Bitcoin. I like, some people see things in a different light. I tend to see things in an orange light, and it helps apply some logic to things that seem really out of place in some instances.
Yeah, could not agree more. And once you have that shift, it's very hard to go back and see the world in a different way. It does remind me of my own journey in personal development. Is before personal development or understanding mindset or different sorts of how we speak to ourselves, the word we use, we're not taught how to think. You know, we're taught what to think in school. We're not taught how can I reframe this? How can I reframe my failure? All these other things. As soon as you change your mindset or start reading about personal development, your whole worldview changes and your standard of life and the way that you almost see yourself changes. And that's how I kind of related to Bitcoin is once you understand Bitcoin, you can't look at people talking about inflation the same. You can't look at the world economy the same because now you see it through this Bitcoin lens and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I wish everyone could see this. You know, I wish everyone had this mindset or like, you know, wish everyone was this positive, but that's not the world we live in. You know, everyone comes from different places and, you know, you can go on your whole life and eventually someone has a terrible accident that leads them to changing their mindset. And I think it's the same with Bitcoin is sometimes it takes those events that make them say, holy crap, like what needs to change or like what needs to change in me to kind of see the world differently.
Jordan, I love that so much, and I so deeply relate to not being able to see the world the same way. And when you begin to peer down the rabbit hole and you learn about economics and you learn about all these different factors, um, all the many, so many things that you begin to learn about through the lens of Bitcoin. I met a business owner yesterday, and this is like, again, goes back to how early we are. And I won't share the full name of the business, but the first word in the business name was fiat. And I asked them, it's spelled Fiat, and I asked them about where they got the name. And she mentioned it's from the Bible and it means let it be. But people always bring up the car company and has nothing to do with the car company. And she had some frustration about that that mix up of the branding of always the car company. And and so I said, oh, that's, you know, it's interesting. In my industry, we talk a lot about fiat, but it's in the context of money. And she was like, what does fiat have to do with money? And and there was no connection there, but her entire brand is built around fiat, and so it's just fascinating how much you begin to learn. You know, so many of us maybe don't even know what fiat money is at all before we begin this journey, and then you begin to learn how impactful uh, Bitcoin rather than fiat can be for yourself as an individual, and then for your business and for your employees and your customers, and all the many ways that it can help shape your sphere of influence.
You know, Jason, just to jump in there because that's amazing. That's an incredible story, and it made me think of not to get too philosophical, but there's a commencement speech from David Foster Wallace titled "This is Water," and the opening story or parable of the speech is basically two fish who had just graduated are swimming downstream. They pass an older fish. The older fish says, "Hey fellas, how's the water?" The fish say nothing, continue streaming down. So a few seconds later, look at each other and go, "What the hell is water?" And that is just such a like, oh my God moment of wait, like you can ask, does it really have to be this way? Do we have to, you know, live on so much debt and print money in order to stimulate the economy and have very small groups of power that are manipulating, you know, interest rates and all this financial hoopla? And it's like, wait, like you can ask that question and then to what you were saying, Jordan, like you can start to think about it differently and you can kind of take back that agency of what you're thinking about and how you're thinking about it. And Bitcoin's really just I mean, again, at the end of the day, it's just a protocol. So it's a blank set of rules where it's there, use it or don't, but it's going to keep going. So you might as well just like at least figure out whether or not you want to use it before before you just dismiss it. But yeah, most people just that don't even know that it's an option.
No, and I've heard that commencement speech, and it was a while back, and it really plays into this idea of you just don't know what you don't know. And I think the people that tend to like lean towards Bitcoin are the people that are just curious and open-minded to question the system. And you see it in the traditional space and just in general, very, very like very smart people that just dismiss it because there's almost a sense of once you have an idea of how the world works, you just settle in that. And I think that's why you see a lot of younger people interested in Bitcoin, or just that generation, my generation. And I think that is honestly going to be the key long term. Is it's hard to like, it's unfortunate, but it is hard, the quote, it's hard to train, or what is it, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And on some level it's unfortunately true. And I think that is why the younger generation, the generation that's coming up that are building companies, they it's like intuitively understood with them that that there's something wrong, or that something needs to change. And I think that is also what gives me a little bit of optimism on top of the Bitcoin optimism, is kind of like what that next stage is.
Yeah, and I would love for you to kind of dive a little deeper into your thoughts on incentives, and maybe we could bring it back to some of those conversations you've had with both current and prospective clients of how you view the incentive structure around Bitcoin adoption. Obviously, there's early and first mover advantage, but what are some of the other incentives that you can kind of point out, especially in contrast to the traditional fiat system and the work of the bookkeeping business that you're involved in?
Yeah, so I would say one of the major incentives that really sits well with me and resonates is the idea of independence, and actually being independent from the system itself. And a lot of business owners don't realize that the decisions that are made thousands of miles away in in the presidency and the government, etc., how much it influences them, and how much they feel they don't have control over that. And I do believe that you have to focus on your sphere of control, your sphere of influence. We can't control what other people are going to do, but I think Bitcoin is one of the biggest decisions we can make as individuals, but as businesses, to take control. And I think that is one of the key elements that I feel is a value proposition for businesses. And on some level, it's somewhat abstract. Of there's no monetary real, it's not really selling it off of a monetary perspective of, hey, Bitcoin is gone up this much. But it's really about when you have when you control your money, and when you understand that, you feel a sense of freedom. And for so many business owners, and I would say for most of them, that is why they started their business, was to become free, free from the time constraints, free from other people telling them what to do. But they're just not aware of that. The biggest freedom, the monetary side of things, they are not as free as they probably think they are. And so that would kind of be that maybe setup, I would say, of like when I talk to business owners, or when I talk to them in the future. And then the second part, I would say, is very much driven off of, and I'm sure Jason has, a lot of experience and can say a lot about this, but how transactions flow through the system, when it comes to processing companies that are just ripping businesses off with no value add. That's just one piece of the puzzle. And then sending, payments to other people, or even the ability for example, payroll being every 2 weeks. Like, I think there's so much opportunity there. And this is kind of looking maybe too far into the future. But when you have a monetary system that's not driven off of the government, and it's not driven off of the ACH network or Swift or all these other things, that it's going all the time, we then have a path to like real-time financial opportunities at any point. And like I said, maybe I'm projecting too far in the future, but like those are the value propositions that I see in the future of companies being able to take advantage of it. And they don't need to worry about the bank being closed on the weekend. Like they can do business whenever they want. Like that's freedom. So I would say those are kind of those big elements that I see value proposition wise.
Medium of Exchange is sponsored by Polaris Payments. Let's face it, for now, businesses still need to accept fiat and credit cards. Polaris Payments helps with all your credit card processing needs using a consultative approach. Think of Polaris like a performance coach, helping take your business to the next level when it comes to accepting all forms of money. For more information, visit polarispayments.com. Now let's get back to the show. Jordan, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned about money or finance since starting Ikifi and supporting small and medium-sized businesses? And has Bitcoin played a role in that realization?
Man, the most surprising thing, and this is just coming off the top of my mind, is how many businesses are zombie companies. And what I mean by that are businesses that are not producing any profit, that are not producing positive cash flow, but are surviving because of credit, because of debt. And I've realized this firsthand because, and I see this, and it's sad because so many business owners, they want so bad to be in a place where they can pay themselves consistently, where they don't have to worry about payroll and all these other things. And then I realized that they've dug themselves in a hole that's so hard to get out of, and they have to keep digging it deeper just to stay alive. And I think the easy credit and the way that the lending industry is in terms of issuing debt, the biggest realization was just, oh my gosh, like unfortunately, there's a lot of businesses that maybe are operating inefficiently because they're operating off of debt rather than focusing on how to improve their actual operations, because debt is so easy to come by. It's so easy to, swipe a credit card, and feel the effects later rather than thinking, how can I position myself to be in a better place 3 months from now than just be in a better position right now. So that was my
And
biggest
just
realization and surprise. And I'm talking small business too, because it is just, it's engraved in them. And so many business owners, they're, no matter what industry, and this is not industry specific, it's very much of, there's so many business owners that have so much to focus on that they can't even focus on the financial health of their company operationally. And they just have to be so reactive in terms of, I need to take out another loan. I need to do this, or I need to get another credit card. I need to approve. I need to transfer my balance. And the debt is so consuming that it almost influences how they think about running their business, that they don't think about it from a, how can I improve my business to make clients happier, customers happier, or to get more business. It's so much more driven on, oh, reaction. I'm, cash flow's low this month. Let me take out, a loan or cash advance. And it's just very much reactive.
so easy credit leads to short-term thinking, leads to ultimate failure.
Yes. Yes, sir. That is correct. That is so true. And it's sad because so many business owners are passionate about what they do, but their passion and their drive gets drowned out by the debt. And it's just a function of the system we're in. And I think it's scary and it's unfortunate. And I feel for them because I see it everything from a financial lens. And that's also my problem, because I go down these, kind of, I worry about my own finances, my business, but then I have to worry about everybody else's, and that stresses me out. But it's also a good thing because I enjoy it. But that is one of the biggest things, and the surprises that Bitcoin has shown me is that Bitcoin, there is no, it's either you understand it and you understand the value proposition, or you almost don't, because on some level, easy credit is addicting, and I think that is also some hurdle to that may lead to pain, because it's almost like you need to understand that if you want a hard money system, if you want something that's going to actually be valuable in the long term, you have to be able to have you have to be able to push out your time horizon, and that can be tricky, especially when you're focusing on the day to day.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's one of the things that, Bitcoiners are well known for their low time preference. Uh, but that is on the exact opposite end of the spectrum for not just finance. We also see it in our healthcare system. We see it in, our news cycle, and so many other things. Um, and I think it is really hard to get people to really focus, more than even 30 days, if that's being generous down the road, for when their next payment is due. Because oftentimes people aren't even thinking 3 days down the road. But in Bitcoin, we usually think 3 years minimum down the road.
Yeah.
And that is a mindset shift, but it's also another way to kind of tell the story of Bitcoin and understand how little decisions today compound into really large and potentially great outcomes in the future. And maybe this is a more personal question for you, but what are some of those things that you do where you're taking on small steps, whether it's whatever it may be, where you see the growth for your business, for yourself, and how just that helps you improve this journey you're on.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, Bitcoin is just compounded or been like a rocket ship for my own understanding of little actions today are what set you up for the future. And I think the best example I could give you is the early stages about 3 years before I started my business was kind of when I went on that personal journey of personal development, getting into finance. Everything that I did led up to starting my business. And I think sometimes we almost discount the beginning stages, and it's very hard to almost start again when it's like to get to the next phase in life, you have to reiterate, you have to be learning, and you have to be always questioning. And I think for myself, sometimes I'm so focused on keeping up with what I've created that I'm not thinking about what do I want to get to in the future and what do I have to do today to get there. Because if I'm not growing, if I'm not studying or learning to get to that next phase, I'm going to be 3 years down the line and say, damn, I wish I started that 3 years ago because I would be where I'm at, where, far, further than I was then. So for me, I think it's just compounding in any sense, whether it's, studying to get to the next level in my business, um, connecting with new people, like always expanding my network, not being closed-minded to say, oh, I already know everybody I need to know. I don't want to say yes to this connection. So it's those little things of just being aware of my trajectory, where I want to go, and making sure those action items are being taken care of every day to get to where I want to be. So, and that could be even, obviously compounding is used mostly on the monetary side, but it's so prevalent in every aspect of our life. So that's what I really focus on is just those little things, those little things that move the needle. I do kind of
Mhm.
get sometimes stuck in the big picture, but I have to like kind of pull myself back.
No, 100%. I think we all do to an extent. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, of course.
So, Jordan, for our listeners, maybe a solopreneur, a small business, someone listening in, a business owner that's listening in, what's one actionable tip or resource that you would recommend to explore for when it comes to Bitcoin in their business?
Yeah, I would say my starting point always is YouTube. I just love like learning on YouTube and like finding videos that, and you have to find reputable people. Obviously, there's a lot of noise out there, but I would say just researching like what is Bitcoin? Like just if you're just brand new, like looking it up on YouTube and finding a video that has a good amount of views, that also has a good background on everything to kind of get started. And then I would also say one of the best things to do is also just reading. So whether it's the Bitcoin standard, that's pretty normal, or reading the white paper of Bitcoin, even though it can be kind of technical, I think reading a source document like that gives the individual more of a empowering feeling of, I don't, most people that probably talk about Bitcoin online or all these other things probably haven't even read the white paper. So I think if you read the white paper and finding that online and just getting that source document, I think that'll be helpful to understand what the vision behind Bitcoin was. And then going into more, I would say, recent topics around Bitcoin. And once you kind of go down a little rabbit hole of someone, you're just going to find what every other Bitcoiner ends up at, the people that you listen to. So I would say that is just kind of start out with curiosity, start with YouTube, start with the white paper, and it'll take you from there. That's my thought.
I love that. I was just thinking about how I think they removed this, Apple did, but at one point, if you put in the right command in a MacBook, the Bitcoin white paper would pop up. Someone had hidden it
I
inside of the
read that.
operating
Yeah.
system. I did
Yeah.
it. I tried it, and the white paper just pulled right up on my
That's
computer. It was amazing.
crazy. That's pretty cool. Like a little Easter egg there.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of off the I guess record here. Was that like a good resource? I mean, I at first I was like, oh, is that a good idea? Because there's so many scammy people on YouTube talking about Bitcoin or XRP and all
No, I
these
think it's
other
great.
things. Okay.
YouTube
Yeah,
is great.
no,
I think that the Bitcoin white paper could probably be pretty overwhelming for a lot of everyday business owners, just because
Yeah.
they're trying to run their business, so they're not always tech savvy people
Yeah.
necessarily. But I love, you learn so much about going back to first principles with Bitcoin. Like that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is like you begin to look at economics and money and things through the first principles. And so if you can go back to the source and at
Yeah.
least start to begin to try and understand it from there, and then of course reading books and YouTube videos, and those can all be really tremendous resources as well.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, that's how I got started, was just YouTube videos. I mean,
mhm,
that's how I got started with pretty much everything now. Is just as soon as
right.
I'm interested, I'll watch a YouTube video. I'm like, oh, okay, now I need to read a book about it, get to that next level.
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Jordan, is there anything you want to ask us?
Why are you both so passionate about Bitcoin? Like, why are you doing this podcast? Why do you think it's important?
One of the big aha moments for me, I was at a conference, and so many of these things that were being said on stage were so grand and had such deep impact. The implications were extreme. And I realized that in my case, I've got three children, and those three kids may go on to each have one, two, three kids of their own. And if what these folks are saying are true on stage, I owe it to my children, to my grandchildren, and beyond to learn, educate myself, and then do something. I did not believe that hodling was enough, that buying and holding Bitcoin, as amazing as that is to extract your dollars out of the fiat system and vote with your money and say, no, enough is enough. I'm going to now live on a Bitcoin standard. And as important and impactful as that is, for me, I believed that I needed to step up and do something. And for me, I've got 15 years in fiat payments. And so beginning to bridge the gap of small, medium-sized business world with Bitcoiners and really move the needle. And we've got a $2 trillion asset, but no one accepts Bitcoin. How do we solve that problem? How do we get the conversation going so that everyday Bitcoiners are accepting Bitcoin in their businesses, and are paying with Bitcoin, and the small and medium sized business community, that's my world. I've been supporting those guys for the last 15 years, and so how do we connect those two and see thousands of merchants throughout the world begin accepting Bitcoin in their business so that we can ultimately realize Satoshi's vision.
I love that.
Yeah, and then for me, so I initially got kind of into Bitcoin through just the permissionless aspect of it. I mean, I think I might have told this story to you, Jason, before, but um, when I was very young, I tried to like create a bank account in my local credit union, and they rejected me. They just wouldn't let me open a standard checking account. Very strange. So then when I found out about Bitcoin, however many years later, I was like, oh, this is like direct to consumer money. Like that's kind of cool. So that was like my initial just justification of what Bitcoin was. And not growing up in the payment system or working in the payment system like Jason has, I initially got introduced to Bitcoin through that savings technology and thought it was really dope to save an asset that actually increased in value versus saving in cash that is getting inflated to zero. So that was kind of my initial first, however many, let's say 5 years of my Bitcoin journey. Then I started to kind of really, get introduced to a lot of the people in Bitcoin, a lot of the businesses that were building on Bitcoin, and this idea of positive sum games has always been just what I enjoy. I love working and collaborating with people to where it's mutually beneficial for us, right? So I've started to apply that towards this idea of circular economies and really using Bitcoin as a way to make like transactions and projects and ideas flow better in a system, because the best thing about a circular economy is that it is built on trust. And when you have a money that can supplement that, that is not that is based on, just a verifiable code, then that just equals growth to me. So I've kind of gone through that entire adoption curve myself, where I was like, no, I will never spend my Bitcoin. My Bitcoin is for my grandchildren. Like that is, I expect to die never having sold a Satoshi, and that will be passed on to my, my future generations. But now I'm at the point where I'm like, well, no, actually, if there's a business or a trade that I want to make where I can transfer my Bitcoin and it's mutually beneficial to us, then yeah, sign me up. That makes it easier. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I want it to be as, as personable as possible, where you have that connection, you have that relationship with whoever you're making this deal with. And I think that's kind of that like next step, which we're starting to see across the world, in places like Costa Rica, in places like El Salvador, and in places like Austin, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee. It's becoming more and more part of the conversation. And again, we're really early. We're at the tip of the spear. So sooner or later, it's going to be like we look up and it's like, whoa, maybe we are living in a hyper Bitcoinized world. Maybe everything is getting settled in Bitcoin. But as of right now, it's really that grassroots movement of making those connections, growing that network, and helping people, meet them where they're at, rather. But like you were saying, building that bridge, meeting them where they're at. And I think that's kind of how I progress forward in my mission, in and having it be a win for everyone involved, because it doesn't need to be zero sum, and oftentimes in fiat it feels zero sum and it feels like, dog eat dog type of world, and that's just not my personality. I'm competitive about some things, but I'm not gonna cheat, steal, or lie in order to do it. And Bitcoin was just a very fair, level playing field that everybody has the opportunity to opt into. And I think that's what's beautiful about it.
Well said, Jack.
Yeah. And just to kind of tie both of those thoughts together, kind of with everything in my mind, is it almost both what you said, it Bitcoin, and maybe this is cliche, but it almost makes you a better person in a way. It evokes something in you to look for opportunity that is not just potentially beneficial for you. And I think that is what the fiat system trains us to think, is very much driven off of, yes, self-interest is a component of human life, but it is not complete self-interest. There's levels to it. There's a nuanced level to it. And I feel like Bitcoin evokes more of a community-minded approach and allows you to actually be incentivized to be a good person rather than just looking out for yourself and kind of moving with the flow of how the rest of the fiat world does. So I think it speaks to that, the power.
That's
Absolutely.
so true. I think Jordan, it's almost like fiat says, what can I extract out of the system? And Bitcoin says, what can I do for others?
It's
And
all time
Yeah,
preference. Yeah, it's all
it
time
really is.
preference. It's Bitcoin is low time preference. Fiat is high time preference. Jordan, you mentioned the Bitcoin standard. Nobody explains time preference better than Safe,
Yeah.
and it's it's really that just perspective shift um, that I think is so important because you can't just if you're trying to live your life just in 3 day periods versus 3 year periods. I don't know why three is the number I keep coming up with, but
four,
there you go.
it's
Yeah,
every four
let's
years,
do
Jack.
four. Yeah, let's say four. Let's say four. 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 years. You can bring along people with you, and you can help build something that is on a solid foundation versus what a lot of the stuff we see breaking today.
Well, and it's crazy just to kind of round out this thought is when I was kind of starting my business, I was very interested in capitalism and I like being an entrepreneur, like you just kind of you gravitate towards, okay, yeah, capitalism is good, etc. And for a second, I'm like, so why is there so much what's going on? Something still feels wrong, you know? And I got interested in like, conscious capitalism and understanding those components. And I realized fundamentally what they talk about in general is time preference and like with companies and not only caring about the bottom line. And then when I learned about Bitcoin, I'm like, wait a minute, this is not like a problem necessarily with this capitalistic idea. It's what is the fundamental idea of capitalism? The capital, what's flowing through the system, and how is it infusing into all of our lives, and how is it dictating how we make decisions. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is not the problem. The problem is fundamentally the money. And it kind of all just clicked for me, and now I'm like, okay, this is the problem we need to solve. We don't need to change people, we need to change the way that people are operating in the system.
100% incentives matter. I love the fact that you brought up conscious capitalism because I think for me that's another reason why I'm in Bitcoin. The more I explored how to be conscious through capitalism, the more I realized Bitcoin is the answer. It is the most conscious. It's one of the best ways that I've found to be thoughtful about money, investing, others, incentives. You put all that together and you think about, especially thinking about, fiat thinks geographically. This is my country, right? Bitcoin says, no, 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 we're all citizens of this world. Regardless of what country we live in, where we are geographically, our skin color, our socioeconomic status, it's a level playing field. And we're going to bring empowerment to the people instead of a top-down approach. It's a bottom up. And like that's conscious capitalism right there.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that's why I'm so optimistic about the future, is because it's not an abstract future. It's not, I wish the future was going to be like this. There's like a clear path that incentives are aligned within the actual system itself, rather than, oh, I have to influence other people to be conscious. No, like if that is a part of the ecosystem, what is going to sprout from that? Like that's how I think about it. And I think that is the beauty of Bitcoin, is it's an ecosystem that allows for everything you mentioned, and it doesn't need to be a forced kind of system of you have to be a conscious capitalist, you have to think this way. It's the incentive that's driven inside the system itself. If you're not going to be that way, that's fine. Like you can be a top-down thinker, but you might not succeed very well in this new ecosystem, because that's not what the incentives are driving, which is really what makes me optimistic for the future.
Jordan, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Medium of Exchange podcast. This was really a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You and Jack have a lot of insightful questions, and just grateful that you guys allowed me to come on here. And it was a great conversation. So thank you both.
Awesome.
No,
Thanks
absolutely.
again.
Thank you.